Throughout history, there is a single nightmare that has haunted humanity, waking everyone from kings to slaves in the same cold sweat. This nightmare isn't about being thrown into a dark dungeon or perishing on a battlefield. Man's deepest, most primal, and most earth-shattering fear is the knowledge that he is being watched by an absolute eye, and that one day he will have to give an account before a tribunal from which there is no escape. This is called the Mysterium Tremendum, the mystery that makes us tremble. For a moment, silence the noise of the modern world and lend an ear to the dim corridors of medieval cathedrals from centuries ago. There is a chant echoing there, Dies Irae, the day of wrath. The lyrics of that hymn have settled like a dark cloud over millions of souls for centuries. That day is a day of wrath. When the judge comes, whatever is hidden will be revealed, and nothing will remain unavenged. Here, the colossal question humanity has wrestled with for millennia stands right before us. In a universe where everyone gets what they deserve, where even the slightest error is recorded, and where justice does not deviate by an inch, how can salvation possibly be attained? If the creator of the universe possesses absolute justice, who can remain standing in his presence? This question is not a simple philosophical debate. This is an existential crisis. Because the human mind, by its structure, defines concepts through opposites. What we call justice is the restoration of order, the retribution for crime, and the ensuring of equity. When a crime is committed, justice demands a price. If the price isn't paid, justice has not been served. Mercy, on the other hand, operates on a completely different law. Mercy is unmerited favor. It is compassion felt for a being in misery, and most importantly, it is the suspension of the penalty. And that is where the terrifying paradox begins. At a superficial glance, these two concepts seem to annihilate each other. Think about it. If God is absolutely just, he cannot leave sin unpunished. If he does, he betrays his own justice. But if God is absolutely merciful, he must tip the scales of justice and forgive the criminal. This contradiction has gnawed at the minds of believers for centuries. Particularly in the 17th and 18th centuries, Europe experienced a dark era known as the theology of fear. The God described to people was not a compassionate father sitting in the heavens, but an inaccessible judge waiting with a ledger in hand, recording every mistake, his wrath ready to explode at any moment. For a soul living in this atmosphere, Judgment Day was not a reunion to be yearned for, but merely a threat of extinction and eternal torment. People lived with timor servilis, a servile fear. They obeyed not because they loved God, but to escape his wrath. So, is this just a trauma of the past? No. Especially with the moral collapses brought by the modern age, the destruction caused by world wars, and the systematic attacks on human dignity, two opposing emotions are awakened in us today simultaneously. One part of us violently desires for divine justice to be served, for tyrants to be held accountable. But the other part of us is terrified of being crushed under the weight of our own sins when that scale of absolute justice is set up. We want justice, but we fear justice. We beg for mercy, but we think canceling justice would be unfair. In this dead end, we are left alone with the most painful question in the history of Christian theology and spirituality. Can God be both a God of justice and a God of mercy? Or must we sacrifice one for the other? In this documentary, we will present you with two guides to solve this massive paradox. One is the 13th century genius philosopher speaking from the peak of logic and reason, St. Thomas Aquinas. The other is a humble mystic from the dawn of the 20th century, warning humanity against the approaching storm in the foggy atmosphere of Poland right before World War II. Saint Maria Faustina Kowalska. One will tell us what God is, and the other will show us what God is doing right now. One will prove how justice and mercy are one in God's essence, The other will give us the map of how to pass through the wide-open door of mercy before the door of justice slams shut. If you're ready, let's begin our journey to tear down the walls of fear and head towards that revolutionary refuge built in the face of the terror of justice. Because what you are about to hear is not just a theological theory, it's a strategy for survival in the approaching storm. Shake off the misty atmosphere of the 13th century and imagine entering a monk's cell within the stone walls of the University of Paris. A candle burning on the desk, parchment scattered about, and one of the sharpest minds history has ever seen, Saint Thomas Aquinas. He wasn't just a clergyman, he was essentially an architect of the divine. He too knew that trembling fear we just felt, that dies irae terror. But instead of shivering with this fear, Aquinas laid it on the table and picked up the scalpel. Rather than an emotional approach, he began to examine the subject entirely through the ontological structure of God. The first and most earth-shattering truth Aquinas found in his laboratory was this: we humans were making a mistake by likening God to ourselves. We are composite beings. Our emotions are fragmented. We might be merciful today, but angry tomorrow. A human judge might compromise their justice when they pity the defendant. However, Aquinas put forth that magnificent principle called divine simplicity. According to this, God is not made of parts. There is no anger compartment and mercy compartment in him. God is simply who he is. Here comes the sentence that bends the mind. God is not just the just one or the merciful one, he is justice itself and mercy itself. These two attributes have fused into each other in his being, becoming a single essence. So when God punishes a sinner, this act is not independent of his mercy. And when he forgives someone, this is not contrary to his justice. According to Aquinas, in every work of God, both justice and mercy are necessarily present in a cosmic balance. But wait, if everything is in balance, why are we still afraid? Aquinas didn't stop there. He deepened his philosophical excavation and found perhaps the most revolutionary yet most overlooked argument in Christian theology. We can call this ontological priority. Please listen to this carefully, because this chain of logic could shatter your fears. Aquinas asked himself, which comes first, justice or mercy? Human logic says, first there are rules and justice, then if someone makes a mistake, mercy steps in. But Aquinas said, no. The work of divine justice always presupposes the work of mercy and is founded upon it. Why? Because justice is rendering to someone what is their due. But for a being to have dues, they must first exist. None of us deserved to come from non-existence into existence. We didn't submit a petition for our creation. We didn't pay a price. The fact that we are breathing right now, the existence of the universe, is entirely God's unmerited grace, love, and mercy. So Aquinas proved this: even the ground that justice stands on exists only because of mercy. Mercy is the root of justice. Justice exists to protect this magnificent order created by mercy, not to destroy it. This is an intellectual refuge. God's primary act is love. Justice is a consequence of this love. Sounds great, doesn't it? The logic is flawless, the equation is solved. But there is a problem. This portrait of God drawn by Aquinas, however reassuring, is a bit cold. Aquinas states that due to the principle of God's immutability, there cannot be sadness or a feeling of pity in him in the human sense. God does not suffer. His mercy is an effective mercy, meaning it has the power to relieve your misery, to pull you out of that pit, but he does not weep with you. Your misery cannot disturb his infinite beatitude. However, when we arrived at the 20th century, for soldiers dying in the trenches of World War I, for children starving in concentration camps, and for us writhing in the loneliness of modern life, the idea of a God who solves problems but does not feel sometimes falls short. Man seeks a God who feels his pain, whose heart beats like his own. Reason brought us this far and opened the door, but to walk through that door and touch the heart of God, we need another guide. Where logic ends, mysticism begins. Into that magnificent static structure of Aquinas, a dynamic storm is about to enter. Right at this point, the scene changes. We are leaving the quiet library of the Middle Ages. Our route is 1930s Poland. As the dark clouds of World War II gather on the horizon, in the room of a simple nun, a voice is about to echo that will shake the whole world. And this voice will transform Aquinas' cold equation into a burning love. The door of justice is closing, but another door is swinging wide open. Now, the scene fades to black, and centuries rush by. Freeze in your mind for a moment that flawless, immutable, and serene portrait of God that Aquinas sketched with his quill on parchment. And then, turn your eyes to the dawn of the 20th century, to the misty plains of Poland. The date is the 1930s. The air is heavy as lead. The shadows of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia are about to converge over Europe. Humanity is drifting toward the bloodiest, most ruthless war in its history, World War II. Right in the middle of this chaos, within the stone walls of a convent in the city of Plusk, a figure appears who is the exact opposite of Aquinas. She is not a theology professor. She doesn't know Latin. She doesn't engage in philosophical debates. She is just a simple, uneducated nun tending to the garden, Saint Maria Faustina Kowalska. But it must be a bit of divine irony to untie that knot of justice and mercy that the greatest scholars have tried to solve for centuries. God chooses this simple peasant girl, and the message given to her is not a calm analysis like Aquinas's. It is in the nature of a warning, where emergency sirens are blaring. The revelations Faustina recorded in her diary add a dynamic and terrifying dimension to Aquinas's static ontology, that is, the science of being. Time. Aquinas told us who God is. Faustina screams to us what God is doing right now and what he will do soon. One night, in the silence of her cell, Jesus Christ appears to her. But this isn't the naive shepherd image hugging a lamb found in children's books. Standing before her is a king with authority, and he utters that terrifying yet simultaneously hope-filled sentence that splits human history in two. Write this: "Before I come as the just judge, I am opening wide the door of my mercy. He who refuses to pass through the door of my mercy must pass through the door of my justice." This sentence is the clearest ultimatum the history of theology has ever seen. Notice closely, it does not say justice is canceled. On the contrary, it reminds us that the door of justice is standing there in all its majesty. To pass through that door, that is, to be judged by God's absolute standards of justice, is the greatest catastrophe that can befall a human being. Because at that door, no excuse, no lie, and nothing hidden remains. Faustina's vision defines this time period we are living in, the now, as a special period of grace, where God has knowingly suspended or delayed his justice. To put this in modern legal terms, the age we are currently in is a period of cosmic general amnesty. The verdict is in, the guilt is proven, the executioners are at the door. However, the judge is holding his pen in the air before signing the execution warrant, shouting, "One last chance." This is what they call the time of mercy. It is not infinite. Just as it had a beginning, it has a definite end. Traditional piety usually focused on the horror of Judgment Day, saying the Dies Irae and trembled. Faustina shifts the perspective entirely. She says, "Your fear is not misplaced, because the wages of sin is death. Even the angels tremble at that day. But do not let fear drive you away. Turn it into fuel. Because before that terrible day arrives, there is a back door, an emergency exit that is currently open." It is no coincidence that this message emerged from Poland. Jesus makes another encrypted promise to Faustina. From her heart a spark will come forth that will prepare the world for my final coming. Historians and theologians debated for years what this spark was. Some said it was Faustina herself, but those looking at the bigger picture understood that this spark was Pope John Paul II, who would emerge from Polish soil years after Faustina, march to the Vatican and shout this message to the whole world: "Be not afraid." When you look at it from this perspective, the subject of divine mercy stops being just a rosary prayed by old ladies or a nostalgic picture hanging on a wall. This is a massive strategy prepared for the end times. Before executing his justice, God is pushing his mercy to the final limit, even beyond the limits. In Faustina's world, justice is not just a legal reckoning, but an existential catastrophe. If God were only just, humanity would be annihilated instantly. But right now, while the clock is ticking and the day of justice is approaching, there is a hand extended from the heavens. But how? How is justice evaded? How does a guilty person get acquitted while looking straight into the eye of the judge? Aquinas told us, mercy is the root of justice. Now, Faustina will show us how to cling to that root. It is not enough just to believe. One must do something. One must hide somewhere. Because when the storm breaks, anyone left in the open will have to face the sword of justice. And that refuge metaphor in the next chapter will step out of the dusty pages of the Old Testament and transform into Faustina's bloody and vivid visions. Get ready, because the mechanism of salvation is far more dramatic than you think. We said that a storm is raging outside, that the dark clouds of Judgment Day are gathering on the horizon. So where are you going to hide in this cosmic storm? If you are caught out in the open, your chances of escaping the lightning bolts of justice are zero. Right here, a spine-chilling similarity emerges between Saint Faustina's message and those dusty desert laws from thousands of years ago. Let's pan our camera far back, way past 1930s Poland, to the scorching deserts of the Old Testament era. Back then, there was a very interesting practice in the law of Moses, the cities of refuge. The rule was this: if someone committed a crime by accident, if they took a life unintentionally, they would immediately be pursued by the avenger of blood. This was the executioner of justice. There was only one way out for the offender: to run, breathless, to the nearest city of refuge. If they could step inside the city gates, they were untouchable. The avenger could not cross the city limits. He had to sheath his sword. The city did not deny the existence of the crime, but it halted the execution. This is exactly the strategy Faustina reminds humanity of centuries later. However, the place we are taking refuge in this time is not a city built of stone walls. Jesus Christ explicitly tells Faustina, "I desire that the feast of mercy be a refuge and shelter for all souls, and especially for poor sinners." The city of refuge here is the Sacred Heart of Jesus himself. But how does this system work? Why must God's justice stop just because we took refuge in Jesus? Is this a legal loophole? No, this is the deepest secret of Catholic theology, the satisfaction theory. Let's set up the logic. When you commit a sin, you don't just harm yourself, you inflict infinite damage on the universal order and God's honor. Justice demands that this damage be compensated, that the debt be paid. The problem is, the debt is infinite because it was committed against an infinite God. But you, the debtor, are a finite human. So even if you worked, prayed, and suffered for a lifetime, you could not pay this infinite debt. You are bankrupt. Here is where the solution comes in. Jesus Christ, being both God and man, pays this debt on behalf of humanity, but with divine value through the terrible suffering he endured on the cross. In Faustina's mystical vision, this theoretical mechanism transforms into a striking, even shocking image, hiding in the wounds of Jesus. Faustina gives this vital advice to a soul trembling with fear of God's justice. Enter into the deep wound opened by the spear in Jesus' side and wait there. Visualize the scene. God the Father, that is, absolute justice, looks down from heaven and seeks to judge the sinner. However, that sinner is hidden inside the wounds of Jesus, submerged in that ocean of blood and water. When God the Father looks down, he sees not a miserable sinner, but the wounds of his own beloved Son, his sacrifice. Because the price paid by his Son satisfies justice more than enough, the Father's wrath subsides. The sword of justice descends, but it strikes not the sinner, but the shield protecting him, Jesus. Jesus explains this situation to Faustina. I myself fight for them and bear the just anger of my Father. This is a magnificent scene. Mercy does not destroy justice, it takes the blow of justice upon itself. Thus, you find a refuge within justice. The price has been paid, but by someone else. And now, hold on tight. While describing the rules of this safe haven, Faustina utters that revolutionary sentence that turns all justice systems on earth upside down and pushes the limits of the human mind. The greater the sinner, the greater the right to mercy. I repeat, the greater the sinner, the greater the right to mercy. In the logic of human justice, this is madness. In the kingdom of divine mercy, logic is built not on merit, but on need. Think of it like a hospital. When an ER doctor rushes in, whom do they go to first? To the person with a headache or the one dying in a pool of blood? Of course, they rush to the most critical patient. That is what Faustina's God is like. The greater your misery, the greater your sin, the more intense becomes God's desire to relieve that misery, that is, his mercy. This is the greatest news someone fearing God's justice could hear. When the devil whispers to you, your sin is too great, God will never forgive you, it's too late for you, you can answer him with this cosmic law of Faustina. Yes, my sin is huge, and for that very reason, I have the most right to enter that city of refuge. Fear must give way to trust, because you no longer need to look for a place to run. The door is open, the price has been paid, and the greatest sinner has been declared the priority guest. But what must one do to enter the refuge? Is this just a mental acceptance or a concrete action? In the final chapter of our story, we will talk about how to make use of this super refuge and that great opportunity of a second baptism. Now, let's witness how the message Faustina received in that cold monastery cell in the 1930s ignited a global revolution decades later. Remember, Jesus had said a spark would come forth from Poland and that this spark would prepare the world for his final coming. That spark burst into flame years after Faustina's death. Fast forward to the turn of the millennium, the year 2000. In St. Peter's Square at the Vatican, one of the most crowded masses in history was taking place. At the pulpit stood a man who had also emerged from Polish soil, a man who had personally walked through the fires of war and totalitarian regimes, Pope John Paul II. That day, he declared the simple nun Faustina a saint, but what he did was far greater than that. The Pope fused the profound intellect of Aquinas and the burning heart of Faustina into a single crucible and gifted the entire world Divine Mercy Sunday. This wasn't just the announcement of an ordinary feast day. This was the official inauguration of that super refuge from Faustina's visions. So why is this Sunday so critical? What kind of opportunity lies hidden here for modern man, terrified of God's justice? In Catholic theology, sin has two dimensions. One is guilt, and the other is the penalty or punishment. When you repent, your guilt is erased. You get out of jail. But the cost of the glass you shattered, the damage you caused, that is, the penalty, remains. Most believers fear paying this price, fear that cleansing fire known as purgatory after they die. Here lies the grand amnesty. Jesus makes this promise to Faustina. On that day, Divine Mercy Sunday, the very depths of my tender mercy are open. The soul that will go to confession and receive Holy Communion shall obtain complete forgiveness of sins and punishment. Can you feel what this means? Theologically, this is akin to a second baptism. Your past, your sins, your mistakes, and all the penalties they entail are wiped away in a single moment on that day. The dossier in the judge's hand turns into a pristine white page. This is not the cancellation of justice. It is Jesus' grace on that day swallowing up all the demands of justice like an ocean. This door opening once a year is an opportunity that renders fear meaningless. No more trembling with the question, how will I pay my penalty? Because the debt has been paid. Faustina left us not only theoretical assurance, but also practical tools. You have likely seen it. The painting of Jesus with one hand raised in blessing, the other touching his chest, from which two rays, one red, one pale, stream forth. And beneath it, that magic sentence is written, Jesu ufam tobi, Jesus, I trust in you. In that image, the red ray represents the life and blood. The pale ray represents the cleansing and water. These are the soul's shields against the sword of justice. To souls suffering from the disease of scrupulosity, those eating themselves alive wondering, am I really forgiven? Faustina advises looking constantly at this image and repeating that sentence like a mantra, I trust. Because the ultimate point where Faustina, Aquinas, and John Paul II converge is this. The valve that opens the floodgates of mercy is trust. The greater your trust, the more grace will flow from that faucet. If you say, my sin is too great, God won't forgive me, that is actually not humility. It is a hidden pride, because it implies my sin is greater than God's mercy. Yet, as Faustina says, your sins are like a straw falling into the ocean. A straw cannot pollute the ocean, it just vanishes within it. Let's return to the terrifying question we asked at the beginning of our documentary. Is he a God of justice or a God of mercy? The answer is now clear. He is the one who dissolves his justice in his mercy, but reserves his justice for those who reject his mercy. Justice is an undeniable fact. It is the order of the universe. But mercy is a massive fortress built within that order, whose gate is currently open. Faustina's revolutionary call whispers this into the ear of modern man. Get under the shield of mercy before the sword of justice falls. Time is running out. The clock is ticking. None of us knows when the day of justice will come, but there is one thing we do know. We are currently in the time of mercy. The door is open. Inside, there is an infinite safe zone. Outside, there is a helpless loneliness forced to face its own sins. The choice is yours, to run away in fear or to walk through that door with trust. Remember, the greatest sinner has the greatest right to enter that door. All you have to do is whisper that simple sentence, Jesus, I trust in you.